Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to my talk. You could go to a different one. I really wouldn't mind. It's fine. This talk is entitled Rails Default, Defusing the Time Bomb in Your Upgraded App, and apologies for the absolute BuzzFeed-worthy clickbait title. But this talk is mostly a talk about the Rails upgrade that comes after your Rails upgrade. So to start, I want you to envision your next Rails upgrade. So maybe think about your Rails upgrade vision board. You guys like make vision boards for your upgrades, right? Is that just, OK, well, digital and aesthetic, perfect. So when you think about your beautiful Pinterest board that envisions your Rails upgrade, what have you done? What is the point at which you're like, yes, we have done it? You can unfurl the banner. Well, I bet when I think you're done is different than when you think you're done. There's one last step that a lot of the upgrade guides don't mention, and that's what this talk is going to cover. So hi, I'm Josh. I'm a senior Rails developer with years of experience. I'm currently a developer at Donut. We're an employee experience platform that integrates into Slack, and we handle everything from onboarding to employee rewards to employee satisfaction, all sorts of stuff like that. So check us out. So I have a confession. I really like Rails upgrades. Like, I know, I'm the only one. I'm the only one, in fact, that at Donut, I am the Rails upgrade guy because nobody else likes to do them. So I get them all. I really like that there's like a plan. There's a defined start. There's a defined end. There's a recipe along the way. It reminds me a lot about baking. I love baking, too. You start out, you follow the instructions, you measure everything, you're careful, and you end up with a beautiful cake or a beautiful Rails deployment at the end. So recently at Donut, we went through a series of Rails upgrades from version 5 to version 7. And we did this in the kind of recommended way. We went really slow, really careful. We didn't go from 5.0 to 7.0. We went one incremental version at a time. And near the end of that process, I noticed a new file. In config initializers, we had new framework defaults _70RB. And I did not make this file. In fact, since the 7.0 is on there, I figured this must be some sort of a new file. And actually, it was worse than that. There were a lot of these files. Now, this is kind of a weird naming scheme. But I'm no stranger to it. In fact, I might have used a similar naming scheme for this keynote. But it got me wondering, what the fuck are new framework defaults? Sorry, Confreaks, if you gotta like bleep that. I hadn't seen this covered in many guides, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. Because I've heard from a lot of people that they also did not know what this is. So here's what we're going to cover. Again, what the heck are they? How do they get loaded? How do they work? Why should you even care about them? If you haven't worried about them up till now, why is now the time you should start caring? And finally, after I expertly convince you that you should care about them, because I'm speaking, and that's kind of like key to this talk, we're going to form a plan to upgrade the defaults in your application. OK, so first off, what are they? What is even a default? Well, default values are configuration settings that influence Rails behavior. They're just like any other configuration setting that you've probably seen in application RB, files like that. But they're a little different. They're configuration settings with an opinion. With most configuration settings, it's totally up to you. Set whatever you want. Defaults are different. Defaults have a suggested value from the Rails team. They're usually configured in application RB, but they can be configured in initializers or really anywhere else that the Rails boot process touches. So also, I should note that they impact all sorts of parts of Rails. They're not limited to just the startup procedure. They can touch the entire stack. So let's do an example. Do you remember social media? So many of the Rails canonical example classes are related to social media. So let's go old school and consider a post. And a post has many comments. And thus, a comment belongs to a post. OK, great. Well, there is a configuration setting. config.activerecord.belongs to required by default. And you'll see this with a lot of configuration settings and defaults. Config dot, and then the portion of Rails, the library that it's in, active record, action helper, stuff like that, and then the name of the default. So config.activerecord.belongs to required by default. The default setting is true. Okay? So if I don't ever specify this configuration in application RB, Rails is going to assume the value is true. And what does it do? Well, it requires that a belongs to association be populated when saving a child record. So if I construct a blistering internet comment, but do not put a post in it, I will get an error thrown by active record when I try to save it. That makes sense, right? That's like pretty basic. But what if I told you it wasn't always like this? Before Rails 5, the default value was actually false. You wouldn't get an error at all from active record. You hopefully would get an error from your database, but no promises. So if the default before Rails 5 was false, and the default now is true, why did the defaults change? Well, there's a couple of reasons, and I will say this is all conjecture. I'm not on the Rails core team. I have never successfully contributed a PR to Rails, so I'm guessing what some of the intentions are based on Rails documentation and things I've read in the issues. So the first thing that a lot of the PRs and issues that change defaults mention are embracing better practices. So defaults are a way we can move developers from one way of doing things to another, and we do it in a slow manner. We might think, hey, we like database constraints now. We like it when active record warns us and not the database throws an error. We can move developers in that direction by setting a different default. We can reduce boilerplate code. A lot of the Rails default, conversation around Rails defaults deal with noticing that developers are constantly having to set a particular option in their code, or they're having to set a particular option in config. And setting the default helps reduce that boilerplate. This one's a little trickier. Preparing for future deprecations. Sometimes the Rails team knows a feature isn't so hot or is going to be moved away for something. So they'll set a default opposite of that to slowly move developers away from it. And this is, again, a very slow process. We're not talking like one revision of Rails. We're talking over many. So here's an example. Belongs to required by default. Our example from post and comment. So all the way back in 2014, this new developer noted that almost every belongs to declaration seems to be a required association. And it's rare that you would allow a foreign key to be nil, which is probably what you were all thinking when you heard that the default was false. So let's turn it on to true and have false be something that you have to opt into. Great. Here are some more examples of changes just for flavor over the years. In Rails 6, action dispatch.return only media type on content type. You'll also notice these have wonderfully succinct names. Previously, the default was false. And what that meant was when you got an HTTP response from controllers, they would only include the media type. That's something like text/HTML. Well, in Rails 6, the default changed to true. That said that you would also receive a character set, like usually UTF-8. In Rails 6.1, the action dispatch.cookies same site protection, the default was changed to lax. Before this, the default was null. So what cookie same site protection does is set a security option on the HTTP set cookie header. There's a couple of different options you can set, all the way from pretty loose to strict, and lax is middle of the road. But it's wild to me that before 6.1, there was no default specified. So you wouldn't get the set cookie header. And in Rails 7, actionView.button2 generates button tag. This is like a personal favorite of mine. The default was changed to true, and it previously was false. Before Rails 7, if you used the button2 form helper, you would get an input tag of type button. It's a little weird. With the default set to true after Rails 7, you would get a proper HTML button tag. OK. So this is all great, wonderful, thank you, Rails. But wait, What if your app wanted the old default? What if you needed an input tag of type button, or you needed the set cookie header to be false? I don't know why that would be, but maybe you did need it. Well, what if your app needed those old defaults? Well, congratulations. Your app is now broken. Is it any wonder why Rails upgrades get such a bad rap? So the Rails team saw this, realized this is not a great situation, and that's where Rails framework defaults come into play. They're there to help get around this potential problem of apps breaking. So there's two files that work together. The first is config/application.rb, and that's where we've talked about a lot of configuration settings get made. The second file we're going to talk about is an app initializer's new framework defaults, 5.1, 5.2, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's talk about application RB config. Let's talk about application RB first. There is a configuration setting that was added in Rails 5.1, which we'll get to, called config.loadDefaults. And what this tells Rails is what version of the defaults you want to take. It locks in the behavior, and it also does that up to your specified version. So for example, if you are running Rails 6 and it's a brand new application and you want to take all of the defaults that were changed all the way up to Rails 6, great. You're going to go ahead and set config.loadDefaults to 6.0. Now, if you have an application that you are upgrading, the Rails upgrade process will not touch this number. This number is set in stone. So you don't have to worry about this changing underneath you. And that way, your application is not going to just spontaneously break because there are new Rails defaults. And like I mentioned, this number is kind of cool because you get everything before it for free. OK, the second file we have to talk about are new framework defaults star and friends. You could have one, or you could be like my application, have a lot of them. And what this file does is it lets you incrementally opt into all of the new defaults. So I'll show you an example in a second, but this file is created by the Rails upgrade process because it's specific to the version of Rails that you're upgrading to. And it lists out all of the brand new defaults that are created or being changed with this version of Rails. And they're all commented out. And the idea is you, as the developer, can uncomment them one by one and opt in as you go along. Now, the idea also is that at some point in the future, you will hopefully uncomment all of the defaults in the file, and then you can get rid of this file and increment config.loadDefaults version in application.rb. So let's take a look at an example. And this is a little imprecise because I've got two examples. And just like we preach, Rails is living it in transparency for everyone to see. So in Rails 5, the first version of this file, this is new framework defaults.rb. This is the one without a number, and you'll first see it starting with Rails 5. And what's interesting about this is the defaults are uncommented. And the defaults all have their old value. So take a look at that first line, rails.application.actioncontroller.perform CSFR tokens equals false. And the comment above it says that the previous version is false. So this is kind of weird. If you want to take the new version, you need to manually flip it. Well, you can see how that might have gone. Developers got a little confused. It was really hard to tell without the comments what the previous value was. When was the last time someone edited this file on your team, et cetera. So starting with Rails 5.1 and then continuing to today, the format of new framework, the format has changed. Now, this file comes with everything commented out. And it also comes with the brand new default coded into. So here is our friend, rails.application.config.actionView button2 generates button tag all the way at the bottom. And you can see it's commented out, and the value is set to the new framework default value, which is true. So when I'm ready to take this value, I can just uncomment that line, and I'm good to go. OK, so some of you might be wondering, that's great, nice talk. But if config.loadDefaults never changes, can I just leave it where it's at? Can I just set it and forget it? We never have to touch this, right? Well, not quite, for a couple of reasons. my talk depends on it. And number two, there are other reasons why you're going to want to upgrade this file. So yeah, older apps don't automatically get the new defaults. So they're not going to break underneath you. That's like a pro. But it's also a con. Your app's defaults your app's configuration are partially frozen in time. You're not going to get any of the newer features. You're not going to get some of the benefits we talked about, warning about deprecations, new security information, etc. Eventually, Rails is going to remove these old defaults, and you're going to have to go back to manually specifying what you want your option to be. Like we talked about with same-site lax, a lot of these defaults are a lot of these defaults are performance and security related. This is one that has bit us a lot. Gems and tutorials generally expect Rails to be running on the latest version of the defaults. So you might take a gem, and it might assume that you have your set cookie headers set, or that you're going to get a warning or an error if you don't populate a belongs to association. And if your application isn't doing that, you can run into problems. And given that you're going to run into a variety of these issues, I guarantee you there is some point in the future that you are going to have to make this upgrade. Just like you could never upgrade your Rails application, but you're probably going to have to at some point in the future. And when that time comes, you're in for a world of hurt if you're going to be slogging through 4 or 5 upgrade versions. You're going to be in for a world of hurt if you're slogging through 4 or 5 default upgrades as well. And that's why I assert that leaving your app on old defaults is a time bomb waiting to go off. OK, so what can we do about it? Well, let's make a game plan. First of all, you need to do a little bit of prep work. Just like with a Rails upgrade, you need to make sure that you are taking a look at your test suite coverage level. Take a look at what parts of your code base that your tests cover. Are you a little light on the back end? Are you maybe a little light or not at all on the front end? Where are the holes in your test coverage? Make a note of that and keep that in mind for later on when we take a look at what different defaults touch. And then also, it goes without saying, you got to make sure your tests pass. Like, if your tests are failing in main, number one, let's have a talk after this. But number two, you're not going to know if one of your default changes has broken your code or not. OK, so this is the part that I spent the most time on, and this is research. You need to review the upgrades guides. So if I had done my due diligence and carefully read the Rails upgrade guides, which I thought I did, I would have seen that, yes, default files are mentioned in the Rails upgrade. I would argue they're near the bottom and not as prominent, but they are mentioned. There is some information in the upgrade guide about what some of the defaults do. Also, importantly, some of these defaults require you to do a little bit of pre-work on the current version of Rails that you're on, specifically stuff that's related to caching and cryptographic signing. You might have to write something like a cookie rotator to prepare for changing the default in the future. You should read through all those new framework defaults files. There's a little bit of documentation in there about what they do. You can also kind of guess from the name of the default what part of Rails it's touching, and you can map that onto where your application is strong or light in test coverage. It's the part I spent a lot of time on. Research the changes in Rails source code and the pull requests. It's a little bit of documentation in new framework defaults file, but not enough to my liking, and there's a lot of context that's missing. So for example, why is the same site default now lax? What are the other options? Good luck. So you're probably going to have to look around for blog posts, or worst case, look into the Rails repo on GitHub and try to find the originating issue and the originating pull request to get some of that context. And once you have that, you can research in your app what kind of effect it's going to have. For example, one of the Rails upgrades changed a bunch of defaults related to active storage. Well, our application at Donut doesn't use active storage. So win. I don't have to worry so much about those defaults. Now that we've done all of that, we get to pick our path. We've got two options. We can go fast and we can go slow. And I bet you can guess which one I'm going to suggest. And it's not this one. But maybe you're feeling lucky, so great, let's go. Fast and furious. If you want to just go for broke, and maybe, it's a brand new version of Rails that you didn't do anything to and you're upgrading, I don't know. I can't really come up with a reason why you'd want to do this fast, but maybe you have to. You're going to set config.loadDefaults to the current version of Rails that you're on, that you've just upgraded to. Then you're going to delete the new framework defaults override file. Then you will consult whatever deity you pray to, deploy, and fix those breakages quickly, because stuff is probably going to break. All right, you can probably guess which option I would recommend you do, and that is slow and steady. So in slow and steady, we're going to enable the settings one by one. We're not going to look at config application.rb config.loadDefaults yet. We're going to our new framework defaults file. We're going to pick one, like the button, or same site HTTP cookies, or an interesting config. We're going to uncomment it. We might consider using feature flags. This is something that I've had to do occasionally, where even though I'm taking a default and I've done my research, I'm not 100% sure how it's going to go, and I'd like a quick way to turn it off. So I might surround, like say, if I've got a belongs to, I might surround it with a feature flag, something like Flipper, that I can turn off easily in production. One thing about config.rb and the new framework defaults files, they get loaded at initialization time. So if I want to change it, I need to restart my application. With a feature flag, I can just turn it on and off. Consider setting a default value. The defaults are just suggestions. And they're great suggestions, but they don't work for everyone. And so they really are configurable. There might be defaults that I decide are not right for my application. Maybe I'm not ready. Maybe my application specifically depends on the old one, and I don't want to make the code change. But for whatever reason, if there is a configuration option that I want to keep, I'm going to move it over into another initializer file or into config.rb. And then you're going to test. You're going to deploy, and you're going to monitor. You're going to look for breakages, but you're also going to look for performance problems, weird log spam, anything that looks strange. And then you're going to repeat this process until some glorious day you get through all of the the new framework defaults, and they're all uncommented. And at that point, you can delete the file and rev config.loadDefaults version. And then you can celebrate because you're done. You've achieved the vision on your Pinterest vision board. Until next time, when we're going to do it all over again. So that leads me to a little sidebar. If you guys want to just join me over here. I don't know if anyone from RailsConf is here. I hope they're not, because this part gets a little spicy. So if you've contributed to Rails, if you are on Rails core, if you're making any change, I have just a request. Could you possibly just a little improve the explanations of the changes in the upgrade guide? A lot of this stuff is really, really in the weeds. So better information in the upgrades guide would go a long way. Similarly, the inline documentation and new framework defaults, that would be an excellent place to do things like link to the PR or link to the issue that created this change. New framework defaults is the first time a lot of developers are going to bump into this. And if there's not a good link to where they should go, they're kind of flying blind. And I think that's why a lot of people just see this commented out file, and they think, well, it's commented out. I don't have to do anything with this. My argument is that you shouldn't make developers delve into the source code to understand these changes. Imagine a new version of Rails came out, and they're like, hey, there's a new feature, action cable. Go research it. We would never stand for that. No, we provide great documentation. And so I think we should do the same thing with defaults. OK, so every time I go to RailsConf, I come back with my team with a billion things I want to do, and I drive them absolutely nuts with too many of them. So I want to leave you with just a few things you should do next Monday, or maybe Tuesday, when you get back into the office. So first, review application.rb and figure out what your current default version is. Remember, that's in config.loadDefaults. Audit all those beautiful new framework default files in your app. Do you have any? Has someone uncommented them? Well, that's a great place for a git blame. But see which ones you have. Talk with your team about the upgrade plan. This is not something to do on like a summer Friday or a bug fix Tuesday. You're going to want to set aside some time for this. And research how each of these changes is going to impact your app. There's great blog posts out there about what these changes do for a generic app, but you really do need to do the work to make sure and understand how your app's going to change in response to it. And finally, don't wait for another fire drill. You always think you have more time than you do, and all of a sudden, it's a late Friday night, and you're trying to figure out how to upgrade your defaults. Maybe I speak from experience. So, in conclusion, your upgrade isn't complete until you handle these defaults. Think of it like when you go away on a trip. You spruce up your apartment a little bit. You make the bed. You clean the dishes. I didn't do any of that before I left for this trip, and I should have, and you should too. By taking care of your defaults, you're paying yourself a future kindness, and your future self will thank you for that. And with that, I thank you for coming to my talk.